Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining myself, Jeff Black, Brandon DeCruz, another episode of Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast. Today is episode 46, Training Program Design Differences Between Sexes Part 2. So we had a lot of good feedback about that Part 1. Aren't you all lucky that I convinced Brandon to do fucking one part and split this into two because it was so much gold? I know, but we're going to be diving into the difference in muscle gain, fatigability, and recovery between males and females. So it's going to be a little bit deeper of a dive. Brandon's a little sick, so give him a little loving for wanting to put through this. I would gladly have canceled on you all and just hung outside in my sunroom that's completed, Brandon, and admired my hot tub and how my body is going to feel so good and just done that rather than join you. But I commend you for being here, man, because I know you don't feel good. So.
Yeah, I'm a little bit under the weather, to say the least. Thought I had the C word, but luckily, thank God, it's an upper respiratory infection instead. But yeah, I'm going to push through because this is who I am as a person. This is one of my ethics and one of my values. I do not miss. And every single week, we come back again and again to deliver value to the audience, and especially because we got so much great feedback. You know, I love that a lot of our female listeners and even our male listeners, even other coaches within the space, which happen to be males, that coach a large amount of female clients, reached out to commend us on, you know, the information that we put across, the things that they learned throughout the podcast, how interesting they thought it was. So I definitely think that this is a podcast that was needed to be done first and foremost. And then it was also something that was enlightening to a lot of those in the audience. So I'm really happy about that. I appreciate the feedback, and I look forward to diving in even deeper into this topic and really getting into some of the nuances beyond between training and things of that sort. So Jeff, tell us about your week, my man.
Well, dude, you know why that podcast was so, and you know, Jason Coley's on my team, and he is a brilliant person, as you know, for training applications, hypertrophy, and all that. He has a really good job of breaking things down to levels. That's what you did really good in that podcast, because most people from the Excellence Cartel that I've interviewed, sans Jason, like when we did Paul Carter, it was so upper level, some people sometimes, that they're just like, holy shit, they can't grasp it. And you did a really good job of breaking it down in micro parts of it for it to be digestible and understood and applicable. So I give you all the props for that one. But my last 7 days have been good, dude. I legitimately took off this weekend, kind of unplugged. I could tell when I get sick and tired of my fucking phone that I need time to myself. So I made that happen. Came back fresh. Week's been good. I'm actually on a wait list for in-person clients now. I'm getting with the guy who represents my district for my gym and the guy who represents the district after next to mine to donate a little money to their city council. So that way I could start weaseling my way in to maybe get some really cool deals with land and things like that I want to, you know, try and do things, Brandon, for 2023. I'm networking with politics, which I don't mind. I find that stuff interesting. So, got my sunroom finished, got my hot tub installed. You know, it was funny because one of my friends, he was commenting to me, he was like, he goes, man, that baller life. And I was like, dude, I go, you know, I did Financial Peace University with Dave Ramsey long ago. A client of mine actually trained with, actually worked for Dave Ramsey. Dude, They got 7 interviews. They actually it's like the 5th or the 6th interview. They do one with your spouse. And they legitimately like have this dinner with your spouse. They just tell you like what the culture is going to be like, and basically like what the fuck you're signing up for, which I totally respect. But they got like free, like one free person could go to the Financial Peace thing. So they gave it to me one year. That was their trainer. So dude, I went for like a couple months, and dude, I learned so much. And it was just a matter of understanding overhead. And most people, as they make more, they accrue more. So they kind of, you might go up to making 100K a year from 70K, but within like 2 years, you've already liquidated that 30K gap by just increasing your overheads. So I've always done really well about reminding myself to keep my overheads low and debt free. Like I have no debt with the exception of my house. And that's something that, you know, coming from a guy who had to file bankruptcy in 2010 and kind of build my whole life back after that, it's you know, it's kind of one of those moments where I can stay around and be like, yeah, you know, like all those 7 days a week shit that I did since I was 18 paid off. Like I'm in a spot now where I stress, but my stresses are different. Like I don't stress about my own finances anymore. I stress about the finances of my team because my leadership has evolved to the point where I'm more concerned about on a higher level, those I recruit and then those I I work with to make sure that their, sustainability and livability and things like that continue to increase. But like we were talking about before we went live, I made a big decision that last weekend was my last weekend I ever worked 7 days a week. So since I was 18, I have legitimately worked 7 days a week.
Yeah, and it's such a culture shock for me to hear that, because I am that 7 day a week worker. So I'm over here like, I can't do it yet.
Dude, so I had my counselor, and I told you about this, Lindy, and he was like, he goes, why the fuck do you work so much for people who are going to quit anyway? And he's, he was bringing like people stay with 3 or 4 years, but still going to quit. He's like, I think, he goes, people who have to work 7 days a week when you get to the level you're at are just compensating for the fact that you still don't know you're really that good to work just 5 days a week. And then I was like, damn. And he was like, dude, if you take those 2 days off, you're going to get where you're charged up, ready to go to work. He's like, new ideas will happen, and he wasn't arguing in the beginning, like you, where you're standing up for the first year online coaching. Yeah, you're going to have to do 7 days a week for a few years. I'm sorry for all the coaches who are listening, but if you want to build a business that's worth the fuck, you actually have to work a lot. Like it's a hard dynamic to understand with what all those business classes and coaches are telling you. But I assure you that you have to put in at least 50 hours a week for the first 2 years, 7 days a week to some degree to build this machine.
We have to be very specific when we speak about these topics, because Jeff, often when you hit on business, a lot of times you're not alluding to the fact that you are 20 plus years in the business. Yeah. So for myself, I'm 10 years into online coaching, but the first 9 years of that, I had a full-time corporate career, which was really my financial security. So now I work 7 days a week, but this is something that I've been doing for the past 10 years, because previous to that, when I was online coaching, the majority of my check-ins were between Friday and Sunday, when I ran, a corporate job Monday through Friday, and then I had my online business Friday through Sunday. So I'm going to continue with this, overworking pattern of working 7 days a week and doing these things. But eventually I will, once I have a team under me, step away from that and really, put myself in a position where I work more of a schedule that aligns with me having a family, having, spouse, things of that sort, kind of like you've done, but you also have a full team under you. You have a gym that you own, you have multiple businesses. So I really want to be able to elucidate that to the audience, because a lot of times people do kind of highlight like this entrepreneur life, like, work, a few hours a day and make 10K a month and all these things. And that's not, like, we've been in this business a long time and we've been successful throughout it, but it's not because we've done the bare minimum like a lot of these business moguls or business marketing executives and these business mentors are promoting and marketing to other people. What you have to realize is if there are people that were previously coaches that weren't that successful as coaches, but now they're business mentors, like, how are they helping you build a successful coaching career if they were never successful coaches themselves? So that's something, just like some food for thought, and just being a critical thinker when you're seeing these advertisements about working on the beach or doing 4 hours a day, or, the 4-hour work week and things of that sort. It generally is not going to work long-term when you really want to build a substantial business where you've built something off of your reputation and you have a good reputation within this industry. You cultivate relationships with your clients that stay with you long-term. And that's why we have such a high recidivism rate and such a high churn rate within this industry, where coaches are on average just keeping clients for 3 months, whereas you and I have a retention rate of over a year with all of our clientele. Yep. So there's a big differentiating factor. We have to look at quality versus quantity.
Yep, 100%. And I always tell everybody, when I got in coaching, I was working 6 days a week with Homeland Security, sometimes mandatory 7, because I was one of only 10 in a Category 1 airport that could do what I could do with the government when I had that job post 9/11 with DHS. So I got into coaching because I couldn't stand anymore hours at the airport, and I really got hooked on it and jumped all in. But man, when I jumped all in 2007, right as the recession hit, I legitimately was 7 days a week and held that pace all the way through 2017. It wasn't until my ex was like, hey, I'll quit working the weekends if you do. And I was like, fine, I'll cut back one day. And she cut back one day. So anyway, to all those who are listening, I'm a 42-year-old man now, and I finally have the weekends off. And I can tell you, by looking around at the things I've done, I don't regret 1 minute the sacrifices I made and all the things I was able to build, like the friendship you and I have, to all the other things. That would not have happened if I followed what one of those business masterminds said. So if you're paying for one of them, I will offer you this deal right now. I will, if you can prove the receipt of what you're paying, I will charge you half, and I will business mentor you 4 times. And that is all you will need from me. And I promise you, Brandon will tell this, if you have a conversation with me for an hour, you will leave with a different perspective to go attack and think about. I remember the first time B and I chatted, I was like, hey, get out there, go talk to Jim Pop. And now he has changed so many lives in so many ways by just having that conversation. So anyway, I'm going to get done rambling. I was trying to fill up a little gap time because I know you're sick and let you kind of rest that throat, because I know you took a little minute to yourself and got a little hydration. So the audience sometimes doesn't get to see all that. But how's your last 7 days? Let's tear this apart so we can save your voice some.
Yeah, so I'll keep this real short and quick. I've been down and out, unfortunately, but this is who I am, that I'm going to always make sure to show up the best to my ability. And when I have an obligation, I'm going to make it, regardless of the circumstances. So besides that, the only thing that I'm really getting prepared for this week is next week I will be leaving for Punta Cana in the Dominican Republic. So I'm looking forward to that. It's my first true vacation in over a decade. So I'm really looking forward to getting away, turning off my emails for a certain portion of that. I don't know if I'll last the entire trip, to be honest with you, because this is just who I am. I am a workaholic, and this is a central component of who I am as a person. But I am looking forward to a few days in the sun, some really warm weather. Right now it's 86 degrees out there. I checked the weather this morning. And so to go from where it's raining right now in Jersey, it is about 38 degrees, to 86 degrees. I am more than welcoming that. So I'm really looking forward to getting away, spending some quality time with my significant other, and just relaxing and rejuvenating. So other than that, man, everything's good.
I encourage you, if your girl's listening, you could delete his email. He'll be okay. Any clients, you guys can feel free.
Don't encourage her.
You can feel free to message me, and my thing will be, believe in yourself. Brandon does, while he's enjoying his vacation. He desperately needs to recover so he can serve you better. But in the meantime, go get some work done, jackass. And I'll be the motivational support for your clients, Brandon. I'll do that one for you. But I'm glad you're taking that trip, dude. I know that's big for you, because I've known you for a while. So I hope you enjoy yourself. All right, now let's get into this. Let's go about actually real quick. Coaching Consortium, April 22nd, 23rd. I am presenting. It'll probably be one of my only spots. It's going to be on copper and iodine. It's got a good panel. We're going to be doing another live event later in the year, and I know that Brandon will be joining that one. So that's a surprise to Brandon. He didn't even know. But nonetheless, if you guys want to catch in with that, message Jeff Sue, First Call of Fitness. We got Sam Miller, Willow Gazone. We got Megan Decorell from Advanced Vitality, myself, Austin Stout, Jeffrey Sue, and Jason Theobald. So it'll be a really good ticket. And then we're doing all like a 2 or 3 hour Q&A on Sunday after everybody presents on Saturday. So that way you guys have a chance. It's April 22nd, 23rd. Tickets are $349 right now. So very affordable event, and you guys will learn a lot. I promise you, with my iodine and copper, you guys will learn some shit you never knew. And the best part is, I referenced every single thing that I put in this presentation. So that way you guys know where I could get it. So that way you understood, because I want to walk through the train of thought so you guys know, how did I arrive at using these supplements? Like with clients who I had already fixed hormonally, fixed their gut health, but they still had these nagging things that kind of just impacted the quality of life. So I think you guys will really like it. I try to make my presentations fun. So with that being said, be sure to check us out. If you need anything, you can message me and I'll point you in the right direction. So the recap of last episode, intro in today's topic. So B, you want to do a little brush up of last week's topic, and then I guess today's topic is, training program design, differences between sexes, part 2. So we're going to get into the differences in muscle gain, fatigability, and recovery between males and females. So a little recap of part 1 from last week.
Yes, sir. So on last week's episode of the podcast, we did part 1. Jeff convinced me to do a 2-parter on this. So we did part 1 of our sex differences between males and females series, where we covered the differences in sex hormones between males and females. So we went over the differences in testosterone concentrations and estrogen concentrations. We went over the many benefits, especially the many overlooked benefits that estrogen has on both body composition and metabolic health. We went over the differences in lean body mass, and fat type between sexes, and then also the differences in substrate utilization between sexes. So how the different sexes, especially females, utilize both fats and carbohydrates as compared to males. So today on part 2 of this series, we're going to tie everything together by covering the differences in muscle gain and response to resistance training between sexes, the differences in fatigability and recovery from training, and how these differences may ultimately translate to our training approach when coaching females. And then also, we're going to cover specifically why resistance training is essential for females. So we did a podcast 2 episodes ago where we went over the benefits of resistance training and how building muscle is essential. We're going to tie that in together specifically on females. And then we're also going to follow up on some of the drawbacks of suppressing estrogen, which was more of a a hobby horse at Jeff. He had some questions about that, and I dug up some research to really elucidate some of the things that I said last week. So we're going to tie it all together and finish up the sex differences series with a bang.
All right, man. So let's get into the sex differences in response to resistance training and muscle gain, because I think there's a stigma that, you know, a lot of women will be like, I want to train on get bulky. And women actually do a really good job of putting on muscle first thing when they start training with weights.
I don't think people realize that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I try to tell women when I'm like, when you watch that scale, if you don't take pictures and measurements in the beginning, you're going to get very let down, because the moment you train with weights, what you'll see is often a holding of the scale weight, but women will just dramatically change their appearance. Like 6 months, I got one girl who's only down 20 pounds. She's a larger client, but legitimately she's already down 8 sizes. And just speaks volumes to it, because, you know, but she went from leg press and 1 plate aside to 4 aside. So that speaks a lot of volume there too. But go ahead and let's get into this, man. Let's talk about the differences with sexes and muscle gain.
Yes, sir. So when it comes to these sex differences in response to resistance training, there seems to be a lot of common misconceptions around how well females respond to training in terms of both gaining muscle and strength. And this idea generally stems back from the fact that females produce substantially less testosterone than males do. So many believe that this will impact their ability to gain muscle and strength, but that's actually not what we see in the real world, nor in the research. Now, it is true that our levels of testosterone do play a large role in determining our baseline levels of muscle mass, which is why males generally have a higher amount of muscle mass on their frame than females do prior to either sex starting to train. However, the difference in testosterone plays a minimal role in a male and female's response to hypertrophy training once they get past that baseline level. So when we look at the relationship between testosterone levels and muscle accrual, I think it's been best summarized by a prominent researcher and writer in our field named James Krieger. And I'm going to read out something that he wrote. I'm going to bring up an article from him because he really put it in a very simple and easy to understand way, which is going to extrapolate exactly what testosterone does and what it does in terms of muscle accrual. So James wrote, variations in your blood levels of testosterone impact your base level of muscle, but have minimal impact on your relative gains. Thus, having higher testosterone levels means having a higher base level of muscle. While the relative gains will be mostly similar, the absolute gains will be higher due to the higher baseline. End of quote. So essentially what that means is when we look at the research on how males and females respond to resistance training in terms of their ability to grow muscle, we see very similar increases in the amount of muscle mass both sexes gain relative to their starting point. So where they're starting at in terms of their body composition level. And many don't realize this because they'll see that males will gain more absolute muscle mass in comparison to females in response to training. But the reason that they gain more pounds of muscle in total is because males are starting off at a higher baseline level of muscle mass. So say a male and female start training at the same time, and over the course of their first year of training, they both increase their muscle mass by 10%. Now, if the male started training with 150 pounds of lean body mass, whereas the female started training with 100 pounds of lean body mass, and they both get that 10% increase, the male will have gained 15 pounds in his first year of training, whereas the female will gain 10 pounds of muscle. Now, most will see this as the male gaining 50% more than the female, which is true in terms of absolute, in absolute terms. But in terms of relative muscle mass gain, they both gain 10% from their starting baseline. And so we see this similar relative response between males and females in many areas of literature. So one of the most cited and well-done studies on this topic was done by Hubel et al. In 2005. And in this study, they looked at individual differences in resistance training across males and females and found that males and females on a relative basis increase muscle and strength to similar degrees. So if we take males, essentially what the study showed was, if we take males and females and we put them on the same resistance training program, we see very similar increases in relative strength and muscle in a percentage increase above their baseline in both sexes. Also, when we look at the most recent systematic review and meta-analysis done on the topic of sex differences in resistance training, which was done by Roberts et al., they found that both males and females had the same relative increase in muscle mass from resistance training. Then when it came to strength outcomes, they found the same relative strength increase in the lower body between both males and females. And the one significant difference they did find was that females had a larger effect for relative upper body strength development in response to training, which may have just been due to the fact that females generally aren't recruiting and using their upper body musculature as much as males do prior to starting to lift weights. So they may start out with a essentially like less trained upper body and have a greater capacity for increasing strength in these muscles. So overall, when it comes to muscle mass and response to training, males start out with a higher baseline level of muscle and strength than females do. But when we look at total pounds gained, yes, men will gain more in an absolute sense. But when we look at things in a more relative sense, meaning compared to a person's baseline starting point, females can gain muscle and strength at the same relative rate as males do.
I have a okay. Well, I guess we'll talk about this. So, sex differences in fatigability and recovery from training. I have, and this is my experience with women in the trenches. I think you have a lot of stuff being marketed towards people like, oh, you should train for wellness, or oh, you need to train for figure and bikini. Yeah, there's some differences, but some girls do need to add muscle and go through some different phases before you get there. But even with gym pop women, I have found that majority of women, you can kind of not crush them in the gym, but you can really push them and they recover really, really well. And that's some of the strength stuff. That's why I have a hard time when I have potential clients who come to me for other coaches arrested them for 2, 3, 6 months, a year. And I get every case is different, but I'm always like, shouldn't you be working out? Like, wasn't that the thing that got you in love with all this shit anyway, was the way it made you feel? So I don't know if I buy in all that. So what does the research actually say on all this? Because I know dudes, you can't, if you give a guy legs 2 times a week, the majority of them can't handle it. They're just out. And that's because a lot of them hate training legs anyway. So they just train wild. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation for another day.
Yeah, so to be honest with you, I have received a lot of clients that have come from other coaches, other ideologies, and a lot of times they've been on such reduced resistance training programs, and it could be due to a health phase or due to a hormonal issue,
Correct. There's
whatever
stuff
it
in
may
play
be.
for that. Yeah.
However, a lot of times when we have like this really overemphasis on rest, it's like these individuals, these females want to improve their body composition, but they have no stimulus for training. And I really think that comes from a lack of understanding of female physiology, first and foremost. So, I'll kind of dive into this a little bit deeper so everyone understands where I'm coming from. But if you really understood female physiology from a fatigability and recovery perspective, you'd actually see that they have a very robust recovery system. And that's what you're alluding to. And that's what I saw in practice as well. So when I read into this research, it really confirmed a lot of things I was seeing in the trenches. So one major difference between sexes is in our rates of fatigability and recovery to training. And much of the research that's been done on this topic finds that females are far less fatigable than males. So for example, in a study by Knuckles et al., they took experienced male and female trainees and put them through a fatigue protocol on the bench where they did sets of 5 reps with 75% of their 1 rep max until they hit failure within the session, which was done to assess the differences in fatigability and recovery between sexes. During the fatigue protocol, females completed significantly more reps at 75% of their 1 rep max, with the females averaging 58.3 reps across a session, meaning they average around 12 sets before hitting failure, while the males average 29.6 reps across the session, so around 6 sets until they reach failure. So generally, when we looked at what it took to get a female to failure as compared to a male, they did roughly double the amount of reps than the males did, with them hitting 59 and the males hitting 29. And so when they looked at the post-training soreness and recovery of their strength, they didn't find significant differences between sexes, despite females doing almost 2 times the amount of sets and reps as the males did. And essentially what these results suggest is that women fatigue slower than men during multiple sets of bench press and can recover from training at a similar rate, despite completing a larger relative workload. So overall, females are less susceptible to experiencing the same level of fatigue as males, and they also tend to recover better from training. Now, the difference in fatigability and recovery capacity are due to a number of sex-specific differences between males and females. So for one, when we look at fiber type differences, females on average tend to have a higher proportion of type 1 fibers, aka slow twitch fibers, than males do, which these slow twitch fibers essentially tend to be less susceptible to fatigue and muscle damage, and they're able to recover faster from training. Another reason why females fatigue slower and recover quicker than males is because of the differences in muscle mass between females and males. So since females have lower amounts of muscle in total, they're able to better supply their muscles with both oxygen and blood. So they get better nutrient delivery into muscles when they're fatigued. This also leads to differences in sexes between blood flow and muscle perfusion. So because females have less total muscle mass, they don't occlude their muscles as much during muscular contractions in training, which allows for higher levels of vasodilation and better blood flow. So another reason, being they have smaller muscles, they're able to get those nutrients in and really get those metabolites out of the muscle much quicker than males do. And within this differences in blood flow, one of the main reasons why females tend to be less fatiguable during exercise than males is due to the difference in both blood flow and oxygen delivery. So we see that during muscular contractions, females have a greater vasodilatory response, so they're able to deliver more oxygen to their muscles and clear metabolic waste products that are built up during training, so they accumulate less metabolites, which generally would lead to higher levels of fatigue. Now, when we look at recovery, females tend to recover a bit quicker than males, both during the workout itself, so intra-workout, like between sets, and then also, between workouts. So for example, in a study by Abney et al. In 2021, they took both trained males and females and put them through two squat training programs, one which was done shy of failure, while the other was done to failure. And recovery after the failure squat protocol was similar between sexes. So when they both went to failure, they both had similar recovery. However, recovery after the non-failure squat protocol was significantly quicker in females than in males, which suggests that females recover quicker than males when not training to failure. And then in another study by Hakkinen, which is like a classic study from the 90s, they found that females recover significantly quicker or significantly more at 24 hours post-training than males did. And one of the reasons why females recover so effectively is because estrogen exerts protective effects on skeletal muscle, where it attenuates post-exercise muscle damage levels. It stimulates muscle repair and regenerative properties and acts as like an antioxidant, which limits oxidative damage. So overall, they're really able to get they have more work capacity first and foremost, and then they have better recovery ability in terms of their response to training. So that's why I was alluding to a lot of times when people are overly resting or cautioning women from training hard, it's like, listen, it's one thing if they're in a state of low energy availability, meaning they're not fueling themselves properly. But if a female's fueled properly and she has effective programming, she can push herself in the gym and not have to worry. Like women are like, when you actually train women, especially women athletes, like female athletes, they're workhorses. Like they can really undergo a lot of work and really respond favorably to it.
I agree with you 100%, man. I have, and you have like, yeah, there's situations with women, depending upon where they're at, you have to deload them, depending upon what area you work at. I think by and large, a lot of women, they say women aren't little men to train like them, but when you actually train women in person, and some of the hardest workers in my gym are the women.
They could usually outwork men.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I think that there's still a lot of research to be gathered by it. And I think it's more of a case by case basis. But I will say this, if what's got you into the gym is working out or weight training, along that line, and that's being removed from you and you're worse and more miserable, then I would probably fix that variable, because there's something else that's off somewhere that you need to do some digging on. I don't think it's the fact that you're training too hard or too much. Often in those situations where women usually get jammed are in those cardio classes, but most women who do weight training that I have seen and who will eat do very, very well with kicking ass and taking names in the gym. So I appreciate you bring out that little bit of the research there. And I'll be interested to see, like, I would love for them to do like something with like weekend warrior Jans, like that would be something cool. Not the ones who compete and not the ones who are kind of like who do all the boot camp classes, but that mid tier that you and I have seen you roam around the gym.
Yeah, like our lifestyle Lisa, like a badass mom.
Yeah, that's what I want to see him do a study on. So if you're able to do studies, Alan Aragon, and you're listening and you'd like to do that one, that'd be a good one. How do these sex differences translate to females training in the gym then, since we're moving off the fatigability and recovery point?
Yes, sir. So I'm going to speak mostly from my own experience, having trained hundreds of females over the years. So really, overall, from a high level perspective, women should train using a lot of the same principles that males do, meaning they'll need to provide a sufficient tension stimulus first and foremost, and will need to induce progressive overload over time to continue making progress. But as a coach, I think it's important to be aware of the differences between sexes to best suit the needs and physiology of the client. So given all the differences we've covered between males and females and how females are less fatigable and they recover better than males on average, we generally see this translate in a few ways during resistance training programs. So female trainees will usually have better muscular endurance. So if we're to train both a male and female client at the same given percentage of their one repetition max, the female client will usually be able to do more reps than the male. So that's something we have to keep in mind. If you're giving one repetition max percentages, prescriptions to your clients, and you give 70% of one rep max, you can't just give the same, you can't have the same expectations from a rep percentage or a rep total from a female than you would a male. Generally, a female will have multiple repetitions higher of at that same percentage of one repetition max intensity. And so not only can females generally complete more reps per set at a given intensity level, but they also can generally handle more sets at that threshold due to the fact that they fatigue slower than males. We also see, as we went through earlier in the podcast, that women generally have a better recovery capacity. So they may be able to respond better to higher training volumes. Now, I say this, and I want to put a caveat on this. This doesn't mean that they necessarily mean crazy high volume training programs. But what I found personally within my own practice is I've had a lot less females who have responded well to low volume, say high intensity training programs than I have had male clients. Yet I've had the majority of my female clients do well with programs using what I'd consider moderate to high training volume. So not excessive. I'm not talking about like marathon workout sessions, but they generally respond to a bit higher training volume than males do. And they can also generally handle higher training frequencies, meaning they'll be able to hit a body part multiple times per week due to their short time course of recovery. And so like in my own experience, I found that, having coached hundreds of females over the years, that when I'm looking to build muscle and better their body composition, the majority of my female clients have responded better to training each muscle group at least twice per week rather than one time per week, like in the bro split that a lot of guys would utilize. And I've also had certain female clients that have responded really well to hitting certain body parts that we've been focusing on up to 3 to 4 times a week. So I've done glute specialization programs with certain females, and then I've hit glutes 3 to 4 times per week. I've done delt specialization programs with specific females, trying to bring up those body parts. Generally with females, a lot of times, especially competitors, are looking for like a V taper. And they're generally going to be focusing on like their quad sweep, their deltoids, their lats, things of that sort. And I've found a large benefit to utilizing a higher frequency program. And then there's another few methods I found to work well in practice with my female clients. And these are the first would be slightly biased moderate to higher rep ranges. So with females, I generally had them do a lot of their working sets in moderate to higher rep ranges, say like 8 to 15 reps. Whereas with some of my male clients, we may stick to say between 5 to 8 reps per set, especially if their goal is more centered on strength development. And I bias this higher rep range as I find that many of my female clients prefer working in higher rep ranges. And also since females have better recovery or better muscular endurance, so they're more able to do these higher rep ranges and recover from them set to set. Whereas a lot of times with my males, if I had them do like a high rep set, after that first one, they're tanked. So their work capacity, their ability to uphold that work capacity is generally not as sufficient or not as adequate as my female clients. And then I also, in terms of progression methods, and I would like to hear your thoughts on this, Jeff, after I go over this, but I will generally use what's called a double progression with my females. And so I aim to progress reps each week rather than focusing as much on load, especially on single joint free weight exercises. So a good example of that is like a dumbbell lateral raise. So with certain movements, I find, in my own personal experience, I find that female clients have a harder time progressing load due to the increments in weight available. So for instance, if I have a female that's doing dumbbell laterals with a 15-pound, dumbbell, and she's trying to increase load, that would mean that she would have to go up 33% because the next increment in load is up to 20 pounds. So it's 5-pound increment. So it's a third more than what she's been utilizing, which is a substantial increase in workload. So generally, I'll initially work on adding reps each week as a progression model before I go to adding load. Whereas with a lot of my guys, I can be more likely to add load because it's a smaller relative increase. If a guy's utilizing 40 pounds and he goes up to 45-pound dumbbells, that's 1/8 of an increase rather than 1/3. Now, these are different progression models that you could always utilize, but I've just found that in practice to work really well with females. Instead of having them, in a certain rep range and then have to go up a load and then utilize, through 2 or 3 reps because they can't get enough sufficient reps, I would rather them progress with reps first and foremost, and then we can work on load over time. Jeff, is there, how do you generally progress your females in terms of progression week to week within the course of a mesocycle?
So it depends upon the female and the client and who they're at. So I do a lot of in-person females and I do a lot of male online and some females online. I usually will go along with women and kind of get them acclimated in the workouts, and then every few weeks do some kind of breaks or something like that, and usually rotate workouts every 12 to 16 weeks. I haven't really delved into the planning of the mesocycles and all that because I'll be honest with you, I don't know if I 100% believe in that. I can kind of look that in the face and say, maybe works. I think depending upon the context, female. But by and large, I will just keep asking women every week, hey, what do you think? You want to back off? You want to deload? Do we drop this down? But rep ranges, I'm like you, 20 to 30 on legs probably is where I tend to go sweet spot for women. And the upper body tends to be in that 10 to 15 range. And then sometimes if they need size, I'll let them rip a workout like that I would have a guy. It just depends upon where they're kind of at and what their goals are and so forth. But as far as planning the workouts and all that, I went through that RP program this year and I didn't find any benefit to it at all, 100%. And I had 4 other people do it with me at the same time. So the jury's still out on if I necessarily go along with the mesocycles. And I understand that there is a science to it and I understand like the thought process to it, but I don't think it really flux out like that or flosses itself or fleshes itself out like that in the real world, meaning it's hinging on the idea that every workout you're going to do at this maximum point when you're in certain cycles with it. What if my fucking dog gets run over the day before? I'm not going to go fucking maximize that workout. So I adjust and adapt based on what the person can do for the day. And I tell people to do that. Like, hey, take the week down to 7. Next week, go to 8. Next week, scale to 9. Run a couple weeks of 9. You feel tired, run it back down to 7. And that's how I kind of adjust up and down.
Yeah, I think you might have misunderstood what I meant by the mesocycle design. Mesocycle is just like a formal term for a training cycle. You're kind of associating with RP because they do use those terminologies.
Yeah, no.
However, I was just referring to the progression scheme because essentially we need certain principles to be in line in a training program to induce an adaptation. So essentially, the easiest way to think about this is we need a progressive stimulus. And one way to induce that is to see progressive overload. So in terms of getting better over time, increasing the stimulus and increasing the challenge of training over time. So how I do that with clients is I'll have them aim for a certain, I do it in multiple ways, but I'll have females, especially, they're working off an RIR scale. So I'm starting, say, 3 reps in reserve at the beginning of a mesocycle, and each week I'm having them descend down in reps in reserve. So by the end of the mesocycle, they're working at going to failure. However, within that, they're adding reps to exercises across their sets within the mesocycle itself. So we're getting progressively to more and more effort within training to ensure that each week is a little bit more challenging than the week before. That's all. We just want to present a challenging stimulus. So I was saying more so, are you doing load? I know in person is a little bit different because you're really responding to that person's specific psychology and things of that sort. But what do you, when you go into a session with a female client, they come into you and, you're doing the same session that you did last week or 2 weeks prior. What are you aiming towards? Are you actually pushing them more to increase load or to increase reps as a way to induce progressive overload?
I usually go with reps first, and then as they go up 5 reps, then I go up weight.
Perfect. Yeah.
And
so that's what I was alluding to.
Yeah. But here's the deal. Like, this is the thing. I don't think the majority of people can understand RIR well. So I think that throws out mesocycles for about 80% of the people who engage in the training. I think so many people are caught up in the nuance to that shit with training. Dude, I watch these guys in my gym. It's different for me because I'm in a gym all day. Like, I watch these people like, 3 RIR. I'm like, dude, that was like a fucking 6 RIR. I don't know what 0 RIR looks to you, but you train like a fucking pussy. And I watch this. Huh?
You know what's funny about this is that we see in the research that more well-trained individuals are better at gauging RIR, but I don't think that using reps in reserve is good for beginners because here's the thing. How do you know how do you know how many reps from failure are if you've never been to failure? You need to get to that level where you're training consistently with failure to know where your limit is to be able to back away from it and then realize. So say that you go to a set, you do a Widowmaker or you do a AMRAP set with a certain weight and you hit 15 reps. Well, then if you were to go into a reps in reserve program and just use that as a programming metric, you would know that 3 reps in reserve at that same weight is 12 reps. Because when you did it to your maximum capacity you did it to concentric failure or technical failure, you got 15 reps, 3 reps in reserve, meaning 3 reps, left in the tank is going to be 12 reps. So then you have that idea, but I don't think people should be starting their training with utilizing reps in reserve. But I think as an advanced trainee, it is really efficacious. And we see in the research that it is quite beneficial for those with experience. And what's funny is we have actually a listener of the show that's a researcher. His name's Martin Ruffalo, which I sent you a message that he sent me recently, and he's a fan of the show. I'm going to have him come on soon because he's doing his his PhD thesis on the relationship between proximity to failure, muscle hypertrophy, and then also gauging experienced trainees and their ability to tell 3 reps in reserve compared to 1 rep in reserve versus 0 reps in reserve. So he actually just sent me one of his papers that is about to be published that looks at the difference between that and a trained individual's ability to tell the difference between each proximity to failure as compared to someone that's non-trained. And we see that there's a massive discrepancy between a newbie being able to gauge that accurately and then someone that has 5, 6, 10 years of training experience.
See, I don't disagree with that understanding but you said the best. You phrased it, quote, well-trained client, well-trained athlete, end quote. That's the problem. A lot of people think they're fucking these things after working out for 2 years. And I'm like, dude, it took me the first 10 years before I felt my back right. Like, you know what I mean? Like all this stuff. And I think that this is where I look at this stuff on social media now. It's like I see people apologizing because they said, oh, well, research now shows that the bro splits were okay and it just mattered. And I'm like, well, no shit, they were okay. Look at fucking Lee Priest and Dorian and them. Like they actually, did something that's more impressive than some of the things I've seen being preached on social media where these guys and girls' physiques still fucking suck. They're like, train with a tent. I'm like, you train like a pussy. Get in there and get a bent over barbell row and fucking row. And I get tired of this is where I'm at with it. When it comes to training, I'm like, it should be something that tests your faith and tests your character when you go in there. And if those days you don't have it, consider it your deload and make up for it next time. And I think too many people just spend so much time being like, well, it's week 7, so I'm at 7 sets, and then I've got to do, and it's like, holy shit, that makes it no fun, and it makes it just meh. And I haven't had a shitty body for a fucking legally disabled crippled person, so I wouldn't necessarily take the advice from me, maybe or maybe not. But I just think that most people, even the research would even support this, should probably go train harder than you are. So rather than find the coach who's going to tell you that this shit will put on 4 pounds of muscle in 6 months or whatever bullshit you're going to be sold, maybe spend that money on putting that effort into your mouth, actually matching your work ethic in the gym. That would be like respectable for most people to see in there. And then I'll get behind the RIR bullshit a little bit further. But I will say in contrast, Joe Jeffrey does amazing things with his mesocycles, but he is working with such well-trained people that's why it works. But you go give that to someone who's maybe done 4 shows in their life. I don't know if they would even know what they would pretend they know what RIR because they wear Gymshark and Dark Sport at the gym. But do they really know what RIR is? Probably not. Just saying.
Yeah, I think we have to, with everything within coaching, it's context specific and it's given the clientele that you're working with. And so a lot of times with because I get more intermediate females that they're trying to get to the advanced level, I'm able to utilize a lot of these things with a lot of these programming metrics with them. But really what I was trying to come back to was just really progressing with reps rather than load, because I just find that to be a more practical way of progressively overload
what do you think of RPE
over time? RP is good for strength progression. I don't think it has real good applicability to hypertrophy training.
You don't think someone's exertion of being like a pain scale, like, all right, 8's like, like that was a pretty damn hard one, like, and then correlated to recovery, you haven't used it that way in that regard?
No, I mean, even when you look at the research behind it in terms of its efficacy, it is better for strength progression than it is for hypertrophy progression, just because a lot of times people's ability to remember your perception of effort is completely subjective. A lot of times it's really hard to differentiate. Was that said an 8? Was that a 9? And that's really why I kind of bias more of the RIR, which has been more delved into or more worked on in terms of hypertrophy, because they're inverse of each other. So for instance, if you did a 9 RPE, it would be 1 reps in reserve. It would be 1 RRR. So they're an inverse scale, but it's much easier to ask someone, without the subjectiveness of their perception of effort, how many reps did you have left? I was 2 reps in reserve. Someone that's well trained, rather than them scaling was at 80%, was at 90%, was at 85%. So I find a lot more applicability for reps 5 and below using RPE, whereas reps within the hypertrophy range, which would range between 6 and 30, to use RIR. But that's just, my personal experience as well as what the research validates.
Yeah, I understand that. I don't know. I guess maybe that's where I kind of like, I want research to do a little bit more with some other areas, and then I can maybe get behind the RIR versus the RP model and stuff like that. But I do think, contextually speaking, my core belief sits with people just need to train harder. And I think that goes for both sexes, and then figure it out from there. But that's just
and I think there's applicability utilizing whatever progression model you want to, because what you're asking for, what you're alluding to, is just the desire to train harder. So that could be done within RPE, that could be done within RIR, that could just be setting maybe a higher baseline, a higher target to reach for. And that could be utilized. Just because a lot of people within other methods or other schools of thought don't utilize maybe higher intensity training doesn't mean that you cannot utilize those. Remember, these are principles. So principles are few, methods are many. And so principles always apply, whereas methods can change. And so we can utilize those principles and manipulate them towards best fitting our clientele as well as the outcome that we're looking for.
Oh, I agree 100%. This is why I like this industry, because we can have debates like this and be able to talk about it. But regardless, I want to get into, I think this one is where we're getting at, why resistance training is essential, especially for females. And that's something that, when it comes to what we were just kind of getting on, or talking about, you had a good phase there in the space where everything was broken. You were broken. Everything's fucked up. Don't train. Don't do this. Don't even breathe. The toxins might kill you. It's causing your problems. And then now you're starting to see a little bit of a different shift in a different direction in the space. But I think what confuses a lot of women is why it really is essential, even more so and better for them more than most men. You have the bone issue that helps prevent osteoporosis, the beginning of osteopenia. You have a lot of other things, but why is it especially important for females versus the dudes?
Really, when it comes down to it, I think we have to realize that every single female that we know will eventually enter perimenopause and then eventually transition into menopause.
Yeah.
So the best thing that they can do is to start resistance training now to build a foundation of muscle, as well as the habits around training to offset the effects that menopause will eventually have on their body composition, on their bone mineral density, on their insulin sensitivity, and their cardiovascular health, as well as other various aspects of their health. And I feel like a lot of times, a lot of females will try to get away with just dieting and cardio to improve their body composition. And that may work early on. That may work in your 20s or your early 30s. But once they reach perimenopause and there's this shift in the ratios of estrogen and progesterone, they just won't. And we see this, they don't respond the same to those same approaches that they've utilized. So what has been working for them no longer works for them. And it becomes very frustrating. I have a lot of females come to me when they're approaching menopause, and they're wondering why they're starting to gain visceral adipose tissue. So they're gaining more, stomach fat, belly fat. They're wondering why, they're having less they have lowered carb tolerance. They're wondering why they're not retaining as much muscle mass, or they're losing some of their shape. But by incorporating resistance training, females can offset the natural decrease in lean body mass and increase in fat mass, the increase in insulin resistance, and loss in bone mineral density they experience during perimenopause, which is why I feel, when I speak with clients, especially females, I make it very apparent, because I have a lot of females that come to me that are just in boot camp classes, or they do a lot of cardio, and I'm all about movement. Like I love just, I really love encouraging my clients to just move their body. But really, when it comes down to females, anytime they want to go into a dieting phase, I almost make it like a requirement. Like, you need to resistance train at least 3 days a week, or we're not doing this. I will not put a female in a deficit knowing their susceptibility to relative energy deficiency, their susceptibility to loss of bone mineral density. You cement all these things in your early 20s and 30s, and women are at a much higher predisposition for osteoporosis, osteopenia, things like that. And so I want to make sure that I'm putting my clients in a spot to succeed. And one way to do that is to make sure that they're maintaining or building muscle, they're resistance training, and they're setting themselves up for long-term body composition success and metabolic health success, rather than just thinking in the short term, thinking, all right, well, cardio burns more calories per hour than resistance training, so let me just cardio my way and over diet my way to a skinny body now, but potentially, cause issues later on down the road.
What is the drawbacks of suppressing estrogen? I know we talked about that before in previous podcasts, like with the men's side of things, like that's probably not a good thing to do, but even more so for women, like I'll be honest with you, unless they're really like the estrogen's off the chart, I really try to balance the progesterone side of stuff
Yeah.
more than touching a woman's estrogen. In fact, uh, there's a lot of good things for women having a decent amount of estrogen. And I see a lot of coaches, they'll instantly be like, oh, fuck it, that thing's off. We're going to try to put you on progesterone, but immediately put you on DEM. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. You're just kind of like crushing one and raising another. Like, kind of work on getting it naturally co-oxed and go from there. I actually read this interesting book. It's called, Aaron recommended our team chat, Estrogen Dominance. I'll post in my story this week. It's probably tomorrow. But she was talking about 3 key components: detoxify your liver, balance your blood sugar, and heal your gut were like 3 things for a lot of women, because she even talked about quote unquote the progesterone steal, which is how explained how that went down with pregnenolone. But at the end of the day, you don't want to suppress this. And this is really a hormone that really women need to learn more about. So,
well, in totality, men and women need to realize that suppressing your estradiol can have deleterious effects. So, last week we covered many of the overlooked benefits of estrogen, and these benefits include the fact that estrogen plays a major role in carb metabolism, in insulin sensitivity, and glucose uptake. Estrogen decreases muscle protein breakdown and limits muscle damage, which is one of the reasons why women have a greater work capacity, volume tolerance, and recovery from training. It increases both GH and IGF-1 levels. It's cardioprotective, which is one of the main reasons why women die far less from cardiovascular disease than males do. It's neuroprotective and protects the brain and leads to better cognitive health. And estrogen is actually more linked. This is something that a lot of people don't realize, and we're going to go through some of this. Estrogen is actually more linked to maintaining libido than testosterone is. And so we see that if estrogen goes in either extreme, so if it's either too low, like it's suppressed, or it's too high, so excessively high, it can cause erectile dysfunction in men. It also helps with fatty acid oxidation, so it helps to burn body fat. And then there's so many other benefits. And if anyone's interested in many of the other benefits, you guys can refer back to last week's podcast as we went through, all the evidence-based and evidence-backed benefits of estrogen. And, during last week's conversation, Jeff, you asked me about my thoughts on lowering estrogen, which I covered both from the negative effects that occur when estrogen declines naturally in females during the transition to menopause, as well as when males are taking testosterone and they suppress their estradiol levels with the use of an aromatase inhibitor.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Absolutely. So I think people should be more weary of trying to crush their estradiol levels, as many of the benefits of using testosterone in and of itself, especially as like a hormone replacement therapy modality, comes from testosterone's ability to aromatize and convert into estrogen, which has additional benefits. However, many of the benefits we see from, say, TRT, which are linked to an increase in estradiol, are actually inhibited and hindered when estrogen is blocked by the use of aromatase inhibitor. So I'm going to go through some research that actually looks at this, because you had independently asked me about the usage of aromatase inhibitors with testosterone and is there deleterious effects, which I was able to recount some of it, but I wanted to go through more clinical evidence on this and some of the multifaceted detriments that it causes. And if you guys refer back to last week's podcast, you'll hear about a lot of the benefits, and now you're going to hear them negated through the use of an aromatase inhibitor. So this is just some food for thought for all those out there that are getting these cookie cutter recommendations, or think because they utilize testosterone replacement that they automatically should use, an aromatase inhibitor. And this is something that maybe you guys should think twice about, because this is something that
I agree.
I have not had clients use for many years, first and foremost, and I've seen vast amount of benefits from informing and educating my clients on. So, for example, in a study by Finkelstein et al. In 2013, they looked at the effects of both androgen, meaning testosterone, and estrogen deficiency, as well as administering testosterone with an aromatase inhibitor to block aromatization to estrogen. And they found that when looking at the different effects of hormones, that testosterone deficiency, aka having low testosterone levels, accounted for decreases in things like lean mass, muscle size, and strength. However, estrogen deficiency, aka suppressing estrogen, primarily accounts for increases in body fat. So we see that when estradiol is suppressed, we actually get an increase in body fat. However, when we both have either testosterone lowered or estradiol lowered, it contributes to a decline in sexual function and libido. And so in either case, if you're suppressing either or, if you have low testosterone or you have regular testosterone levels, but you've suppressed your estradiol, you're predisposing yourself to issues or declines in your sexual function and libido. Then last week, we also covered how estrogen is cardioprotective and how it helps with maintaining healthy cholesterol levels. Now, in one study, researchers examined the influence of aromatization of testosterone to estrogen on HDL cholesterol levels. So this is what is known as our good cholesterol. What they did was they divided healthy young males into different groups where each were given 280 milligrams of testosterone enanthate per week for 12 weeks. However, in one group, they were also given an aromatase inhibitor. Now, both groups receiving testosterone had their average test levels increase to the same testosterone value of 1,155 nanograms per deciliter. But the aromatase inhibitor group ended the study with an estradiol value of 19 picograms per milliliter, whereas the test alone group that didn't use an aromatase inhibitor ended the study with an estradiol value of 68 picograms per milliliter. And then they measured their HDL changes from baseline, so prior to starting testosterone therapy, and found that the group using the aromatase inhibitor had their HDL levels, which are good cholesterol, reduced by 25%. So they had their total HDL levels reduced by 25% in just 12 weeks, whereas there were no significant differences or changes in HDL levels for the group taking testosterone alone. So often we hear that, taking exogenous hormones is going to tank your HDL. Well, often it's due to the usage of an aromatase inhibitor. Now, we also have to look at the relationship between estrogen and IGF-1. In one study, they wanted to determine if utilizing testosterone increases IGF-1 production on its own, or if that increase in IGF-1 production is due to the aromatization to estrogen. So what they did was they took two groups of males on testosterone replacement, but had one group use an anti-estrogen. And so when they looked at just the testosterone treatment by itself, it resulted in a significant increase in 24-hour mean serum growth hormone levels and IGF-1 levels. However, those who were given the anti-estrogen in conjunction with the testosterone replacement saw a significant reduction in their 24-hour average GH and IGF-1 levels, which shows that in order to get the beneficial effect of increasing IGF-1, we need to allow for the conversion of testosterone to estrogen. Another thing, so we spoke last week about how estradiol or estrogen is neuroprotective. Well, research has shown that when AIs are given with a physiological dose of testosterone, so like a testosterone replacement dose of testosterone, the neuroprotective benefits are inhibited as it no longer aromatizes to estrogen, which is what confirms the neuroprotective benefits. So now we don't get the brain boosting benefits of testosterone replacement because we've suppressed estradiol in and of itself. Another benefit of estrogen is it increases insulin sensitivity. So estrogen plays an important role in glucose uptake by activating an enzyme in muscle post-training that helps to increase glucose uptake and enhance recovery. However, when an AI is used and estrogen is suppressed, this glucose uptaking effect of estrogen is hindered. So you'll notice that you won't have as good of insulin sensitivity. And this is also something we see physiologically, like just throughout the biological life course of females. As they enter menopause, they become more and more insulin resistant. So they're unable to uptake glucose as well. And last but not least, there was a systematic review and meta-analysis from 2011, and they found that longer durations of aromatase inhibitor use are associated with statistically significantly higher occurrences of cardiovascular events. And this is due to the fact that AIs may have a negative effect on the endothelium, which can increase the risk of atherosclerosis. So overall, when it comes to the topic of blocking or limiting estrogen, this is something we want to avoid doing due to the many physiological benefits estrogen provides both females and males with. So this is something I just wanted to provide a little bit more food for thought, because we did get a lot of positive feedback and a lot of questions and inquiries regarding estradiol. And this is something like for years, the last 10 years I've been coaching people, this has always been like a common fallacy. Like I'll have males come to me and say, I want to make sure, if they're getting put on testosterone replacement therapy from their endocrinologist or from a hormone replacement clinic, they're very adamant about suppressing their estrogen. They think estrogen is like this demonized hormone that needs to be completely suppressed and avoided. And same thing, especially within the last few years, we've had a lot of functional nutrition individuals, functional medicine practitioners that have really tried to, I guess, overplay some of this estrogen dominance in females. And really it's, when we think about estrogen dominance, really what it is high estrogen, low progesterone. Like if you look in the research, that's actually how they refer to it. And it's a skewing of the ratios first and foremost. And a big issue with that is a lot of times they're not looking at blood work correctly, first and foremost. They're not actually getting it around day 21 where progesterone is actually peaking. So you're going to have a suppression of, if progesterone's low and estradiol is high, say in the follicular phase, you're going to be throwing off your readings first and foremost because you haven't gotten that peak in progesterone after ovulation, which comes from the corpus luteum. However, so you're not getting good, accurate values first and foremost, but also you're not looking at the relative ratio. That's really what estrogen dominance refers to. So like Jeff was alluding to, let's try to bring up your progesterone levels, which are generally clinically significantly low. So a lot of times I have females come to me, they think they're estrogen dominant, which they are from a ratio perspective. However, their estradiol is not in a high range. It's just that their progesterone is so far suppressed due to low energy availability, due to underfueling themselves, due to overly stressing themselves. And so it's, essentially causing them to have inovulatory cycles where they're not getting that ovulation, really getting that spike in progesterone, but also they're not focusing on that, and they're only focusing on estradiol, and they're just trying to drive that down rather than focusing on restoring their progesterone levels, increasing that other hormone, and then getting those relative ratios in a better, in a more healthy ratio of one to another.
I'm at the point now that I've been doing that blood work long enough, the comprehensive weight loss panel and all that, that I almost want to go Dutch with everybody at this point. I just think you see more. I know it's a cost thing and it really depends, but I've really gotten into Dutch on that stuff. But you're right. A lot of people don't go on that, or coaches don't tell them to go day 20, 21, 22, or shit. Even their doctor's like, oh no, there's no reason to run hormones on you. You're a perfectly healthy 40-year-old woman, or something like that. And not taking the, the context of what the client's trying to get after into mind. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I do see that misunderstood a lot. People be like, well, when is it? I'm like, hey, you're supposed to go here. But now I just think Dutch test just works really well for some of that, but it's pretty pricey. Price difference.
Absolutely. No, I think really when it comes down to females, and it's not that I'm not attention oriented or detail oriented with my male clients. I believe that their attention to detail makes all the difference. I always say that, especially I'm working with intermediate and advanced individuals, but there's a lot of women's and female physiology that needs to be understood. And it was when I really dug deeper into this 5-6 years ago that it really allowed me to help my clientele more. And that's why I wanted to do a podcast on this, because there's a lot of little things within programming, within a woman's physiology, within even understanding the menstrual cycle in and of itself, that if you as a coach, you don't understand that, and a lot of females in and of themselves, they don't understand their own, hormonal fluctuations, their cycle. They're not tracking things like that. If they're not understanding these things, they may be getting data that is not being properly interpreted. So the same thing with the labs. Like, I'm always making sure to inform my clients how to properly approach labs, because if you get me labs and they're skewed from how you take them, or the time period in which you go, or the circumstances around them, you trained right before them, or you trained, the day before, you're skewing all these values, and we're getting inaccurate values and then making inaccurate assessments off of those values. So it's really important to go in with a proper plan and really pay attention to detail to really help, clients in general. But this is something that I find a lot of females within the space have been given as a service by not being educated on some of these topics, and because coaches don't understand these, they don't highlight them. So I really wanted to allude or elucidate some of these differences between male and female clients, because there really are some programming differences that we need to take into consideration, really to give the best service to our clients as individuals, based on their unique physiology, their response. And then also we have to take into consideration all the individual characteristics of that person's, life. So these were the base characteristics, and these are some of the things that I look at when designing a program. But at the same time, it's customized to the individual. So not every female is the same way. Not every female responds the same way to the menstrual cycle and to various, to even their transition to menopause. And so we have to always realize that coaching is both an art and a science. So we have the science, it gives us a general direction to go in, and coaching is really about taking that science and twisting it and manipulating it in a fashion that best suits the people that you're working with.
I agree with you 100%. B, where can everybody find you at, man? Thanks for sucking it up and doing a good one today, dude. I know we had some good back and forth, and that is always good for audience to hear how you flesh out ideas and get better and better understanding, is to have good conversations, like we did, especially over the mesocycle stuff. It just our differences on what we experience and see through RIR and RP and all that. That was some good gold today. So where can everybody find you and give you a follow?
You guys, feel free to reach out to me at BrandonDeCruz_ on Instagram, or on my email, which is bdecruzfitness@gmail.com. As always, guys, please like, share, subscribe. We would really appreciate you guys giving us feedback on the show. This is why we come to you guys weekly, and everything that you do is much appreciated. So Jeff, close us on out, my man.
Well, you guys can follow me. I think IG kind of likes me again. I don't know until I posted probably the shitty Ukrainian thing I did yesterday. But nonetheless, for now, as of today on Tuesday, I am available, Jeff Unbreakable Black on Instagram. I'm actually working on my YouTube stuff for Relentless Forever. You could give us a follow over there, myself, Aaron, and Jason. But I'm working on a video where I go over with clients, professionally done one, or for the people who out there, why switching into keto sometimes unsticks people, and just some of the results I've had and things like that. Because I always hear the stuff about fad dieting. So I'm getting more into video stuff just to kind of break into it. And it's been pretty cool using my writing to write some scripts and all that. So that's where y'all can give me a follow. But B, man, I really appreciate it, dude, and had a good time with you.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure, my man.
All right, guys, be sure to give us a review, share us. All that shit does matter. We love y'all. B and I are going to be working on something for maybe later this year or early next year, an event at my gym, maybe something private where we'll present, maybe bring a few of our cool little buddies along. Like a little Chasing Clarity, maybe PC. I don't know. We'll think of something fun, but you'll see us here soon. But anyway, guys, we appreciate all the love and support. So see y'all again next week. Peace.